you saw the very best players the entire country has to offer, and you saw it throughout the course of the weekend.
He's growing, he's improving at such a rapid rate. He's going to be a very good player.
This guy's a cross between Sean Marion and Lamar Odom. He's a 6'8" lefty, a high-level athlete, but also got a little bit of point-forward skills in him as he can handle and pass the ball extremely well. At this point, they are simply the standard by which everyone else is judged in prep school basketball. He's considering the likes of Michigan, North Carolina, Kentucky, Kansas.
Welcome back to the Upside Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Finkelstein, and this week we are very excited to have Arkansas head coach Eric Musselman with us. Coach Musselman is not only one of the most accomplished coaches in all of college basketball, but he is a person who has lived coaching very literally throughout his entire life. Growing up the son of a very prominent coach. In fact, he and his father, the only father-son duo, or the first father-son duo, they're going to have that title forever, to be head coaches in the NBA. So, Coach, thank you very much for making the time to join us here today.
No, thanks so much for having me on, Adam. Appreciate it.
So, Coach, there's a variety of different things that I want to talk to you about, but I want to get right into the father-son connection. I mean, we said that you and your dad have that distinction of being head coaches in the NBA, but I was, in my preparation for this interview, I was listening to some of the podcasts you've done recently, stumbled upon your interview with Dan Dickau, who I know played for you at one point, and you were talking about growing up, your father's son, and how your childhood was kind of atypical relative to most other kids. And the story really resonated with me in terms of like looking at box scores and stuff. So I just wanted to ask you to kind of take us to the very beginning, growing up the son of a coach, and what that meant to you and how deep in that process you were at such a young age.
Well, I was probably as deep as anybody could be, because my dad was he was my idol. He was my best friend. I wanted to walk in his footsteps, Adam. And, most kids are playing in sandboxes or watching cartoons when they wake up in the morning. Like my day was, I would go to elementary school, and then my mom would drop me off at Williams Arena at the University of Minnesota, and I'd watch my dad's practices. I went on road trips with him. I was ball boy, way back at the U of M. And then I was also a ball boy when my dad was coaching the Cleveland Cavaliers and I was in high school. And so I've always wanted to coach. I've always wanted to be attached to him. I remember recruiting stories when my dad was at Minnesota, and recruits coming on unofficial and official visits. And so really, really fortunate not only to have a dad, Adam, that I could kind of hang out with and learn leadership qualities and X and O's, but also the doors that he opened with people in other sports as well. So not often that you can, jump on a team plane and go on a road trip, and that's what your weekend's like as an elementary school age student.
No doubt. Now I'm going to come back to the the roster construction and recruiting stories with your dad. But before I totally get away from your childhood, talk to me about, there had to have been some collateral damage, for lack of a better term, because you weren't on the playground and stuff. Was there ever a time when somebody said, hey, maybe little Eric is taking this a little too far? Was it just all basketball all the time?
It was. Yeah, I think I did take it too far at times. Like, I think one thing is when my dad got fired from Cleveland Cavaliers, and that was when I was in high school.
Yeah,
I found out I was in a car coming back from my own basketball practice, and my girlfriend at the time was a cheerleader, and we had the radio on. We did not have sports radio on. It was just music, and in between songs, they came with breaking news. And I just remember asking her to pull over to the side of the road, and I just started crying. It's unique to find out that your dad lost his job on the radio. But I also think it really toughened me up. And also, you can't take things personal in this business because, it's a win and loss kind of business, especially at the pro level. And I learned that at a really, really young age.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That is I mean, certainly that upbringing really did shape you for this. Was there any point at which you thought you might do anything other than coach? Was there ever a thought to anything else?
Well, when I was in college at the University of San Diego, my mom did not want me to get into coaching. She thought maybe front office or management. My dad was on board with that. And then there was a point where my mom didn't want me to get involved in athletics at all, just because she felt it was so tough on our family to move so much.
Yeah.
And so I kind of fooled her and told her that I was going to be a poli-sci major and then eventually go to law school at the University of San Diego when I was done with my undergraduate. But it was really just to appease her so I could get through my 4 years and then get right into coaching.
So, all right, now let's go back to some of the lessons you learned from your dad, and let's start on the college side. Recruiting wise, how was recruiting different then than it is now? Is there any big takeaways that you remember when your dad was a recruiter at the college level?
Well, recruiting at that time I don't think there was many rules on times. I mean, I remember some players in particular that I think those guys saw my dad more throughout their high school than I saw my own dad. I mean, two guys in particular, Adrian Dantley and Lionel Hollins, those two guys were the two players that my dad recruited at the highest pace. He put all his energy and effort. Mm-hmm. And I remember when Adrian Dantley, it was actually his aunt that made the call to my dad that he was going to go to Notre Dame instead of the University of Minnesota. And my dad walked around literally like a zombie. He was like in a trance for like 3 days because he had put so much effort. And as far as official visits, those were the two guys. And I think I was in like 4th or 5th grade. Both those guys, like I was in awe of their personality. And so
you got to spend time with them when they were recruits.
Oh yeah, because every recruiting visit, my dad would have the guys over to the house for a meal with just my dad, myself, my mom, and my sister. Those two guys had infectious personalities, and obviously, then when you watch them at Arizona State, and you watch Dantley at Notre Dame, and then they go on to have such great NBA careers. I know why my dad was so upset, but the one thing I learned is he really, really went after 5 stars or pros. He recruited Michael Thompson, who ended up being the number 1 pick in the draft, in the NBA draft. That's obviously Klay Thompson's father. Right. So just the level of talent that he was recruiting at Minnesota, guys like Mark Landsberger, who ended up playing for the LA Lakers, and Mark Oberding, who was a longtime San Antonio Spurs. And then even guys that when he left Minnesota to go to the ABA, he had been recruiting Kevin McHale for several years because McHale was from Minnesota. And then Ray Williams was an incoming player who had a long, big-time NBA career. So in his time at Minnesota, I mean, I saw him recruit and land so many top-level talent and guys that went on to have great NBA careers.
Well, and the thing that's striking about that is Minnesota is not your, conventional blue blood job, even at that time. I mean, it's not like you're down south and you got the weather or anything. And Adrian Dantley was at DeMatha. He was in Maryland. I mean, that's a wide geographic base, and to be able to appeal to prospects of that caliber. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Adrian Dantley was the only guy in DeMatha history who ever started as a freshman for Morgan Wooten, if I'm not mistaken.
That's true. The amazing thing, Adam, is they had a direct pipeline to the Bahamas.
Wow.
And Osborne Lockhart, who played for the Globetrotters for I think 18 years, Osborne was from Nassau, Bahamas, as was Michael Thompson. And it started with a player named Sweet Pete Gilcud, who went to Minnesota. And many years later, when I was coaching in the NBA and Michael Thompson was doing radio for the Lakers, he came into our locker room pregame and he said, "Hey, Muss, I just want to tell you one quick story about your dad. When he was recruiting me, he was sending me pictures of palm trees as if Minnesota had palm trees." And Michael said when he got to obviously Minneapolis, St. Paul area, there was no palm trees there.
I would imagine. Yeah, that's usually the reverse. Recruit somebody from Minnesota, come to the Bahamas. Now, I'm not gonna skip everything in between, but obviously now, you're a father yourself. How does the way in which you grew up shape the choices that you and your wife make with your kids? Are your kids as consumed by basketball at this stage as you were, or is it just kind of up to them to see where they're passionate about?
Yeah, so my 10-year-old daughter Mariah has zero, and I mean when I say zero, I mean zero interest in basketball, other than when we're playing an NCAA tournament and she can get on, TV. Then
Right.
the game, but she doesn't play it. She doesn't like it. My two sons, I was actually a single father most of their growing up, and so I rebounded for them. They both were really good high school players. One of my sons won a state championship at the highest level in the state of California, which is an incredible accomplishment.
Absolutely.
My two sons heavily involved in basketball. Daughter not so much, and my oldest son Michael's on staff as a recruiting director. Coordinator at Arkansas, and then my other son is at the University of San Diego as a sophomore, and I'm sure he will be an additional third generation in the coaching world in the very near future.
There you go. So you're with your dad's friend. You're not talking anybody out of joining the business then.
No, I'm going to let him keep it. The round ball has been very, very good to me and my family.
Gotcha. All right, so let's circle back now. Now you went on to be head coach and a general manager in the CBA, obviously a head coach at a young age in the NBA, and now, of course, everybody knows your success in the college ranks. As you reflect on that journey and the uniqueness of it, is there certain differentiating criteria of those different levels that may not be as expected to the average fan? Is there something that differentiates one stop from the other that may be not counterintuitive, but something that people may not recognize?
I mean, I think there's just so many differences at all levels, and the NBA today is much different than it used to be. And I think that when I look at my time coaching the NBA, it's really interesting because I got such an opportunity at such a young age. I know so much more now. I'm more mature, but I got an opportunity at a young age, and at that point, I think the players were really teaching me as much as I was teaching them. But the little nuances, like when I first got into college, I had all these playbooks with side out of bounds, and I found out really quickly that in the college game, baseline out of bounds is more important. Like in the NBA, you can't survive you've got to be a great side out defending coach, side out offensive coach. College, it's all about the baseline out, defense and offense. There's a lot of little things. And then I really, you don't know. You're watching an NBA game, you watch a college game, unless you coach both levels, you don't understand the difference between a 40-minute game and a 48-minute game. And in college, playing 2 games a week as opposed to maybe playing 3 or 4 games a week. And then when you coach in the G League, you've really got to utilize your bench because travel is so hard. And a lot of times you're traveling the day of the game. So I think all these experiences can really shape you as a coach. And really, Adam, maybe the spot that I've learned the most coaching is when I coached the Dominican Republic national team and the Venezuelan national team, because what that did, when half the team doesn't even speak the same language as you do, you really have to develop a great comprehension of what you're saying. You have to slow down your speech, and you've got to be a really, really good demonstrator. And I think from a demonstration standpoint, it really changed my coaching perspective. And now that I'm 55 years old, it's really important for me to be in physical shape that I can still go out and demonstrate. And those were lessons learned coaching overseas.
That's very interesting stuff. This is similar, but I say, if you're doing TV, I never realized how similar TV was to being in a huddle, because the way I explain it is you have to be able to describe it clearly and concisely so that someone who does not have the same level of expertise as theoretically you do can grasp what you're trying to articulate. And that's not necessarily that different from being in a huddle. So I can't imagine trying to do it when there's a language barrier as well. So here, this is a little bit of a unique question, but for a guy who is a basketball lifer in every sense of the term, you have and spent time in the NBA, so a purist by all forms of the definition. You have cultivated a very unique ability to tell stories, and it's helped you in recruiting. It's helped you in branding your program. And there's whether it's I remember when the Twins came back to Nevada, or different guys have committed, or there's so many different narratives that you've been able to really market to your fan base and build your program's brand, your personal brand. Where did that come from? Because I can't imagine that was what was, growing up, that had to have been something that you picked up along the way or implemented with your own creativity. But that's got to be one of your defining characteristics at this point. So I'm just curious where that's rooted.
Well, it's so interesting, Adam, because I think from a reputation standpoint, when I was in the NBA at a young age, people thought old school coach, really disciplined, doesn't have enough fun. And now I think people that have known, me through social media, oh, that guy's a clown. All he does is play around on social media. He doesn't know X and O's. So I've had these two completely different perceptions from afar.
Wow.
What people don't understand, Adam, is my dad was so far ahead of his time as a promoter. When he coached at Ashland College, they had a pregame warm-up where guys spun the ball. A guy was on a unicycle that was on scholarship.
Wow.
And he took that pregame warm-up and brought it to the University of Minnesota. And you can actually find it on YouTube if you Google it. And it's amazing to see Phil Flip Saunders juggling 3 balls and Michael Thompson spinning the ball on his finger.
And that's when the Globetrotters were bigger too, right? With that type of content.
Yes, and it is a Globetrotter thing. Music blaring. They did the pregame warm up to 3 songs. One of them was Around the Clock. I mean, it's interesting. Wow. if you go and watch it on YouTube, and then if you actually think that this happened before a Big Ten game. Yeah. And the clip that's on YouTube is prior to them playing Indiana, the year that Coach Bobby Knight had an undefeated Indiana team. Right. We did do that warm-up my first year at Nevada. It took about 22 to 25 minutes a day before every practice. So it became a little bit too taxing to go through this pregame warm-up. But when we would go to a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Taco Bell, when my dad was coaching at the University of Minnesota, we had a trunk full of T-shirts, and he would embarrass me. He would walk in and pass out Golden Gopher T-shirts. So he was really, really into promoting, branding. And the really interesting thing is Charlie O. Finley, probably the most creative owner in all of sports, who owned the Oakland A's, came up with those Oakland A's uniforms with the bright yellow and the green. Yeah. Charlie Finley owned an ABA team called the Memphis Tams. And because of my dad's promotion and branding at the University of Minnesota, Charlie Finley tried to hire my dad 3 different times because Charlie Finley was a promoter and believed that my dad would fit his system. My dad never took a job with Mr. Finley, but that kind of shows maybe where I got a lot of these ideas from a branding standpoint. And then on my mother's side, her family has owned Pepsi companies throughout Texas and Florida and Ohio. And so I've always been privy to a lot of their branding conversations that my mom has had with her father and her brother.
That's really interesting stuff, because and when you're talking about relocating from Nevada to Arkansas, where there's no overlap in the recruiting base, being able to cultivate your message and create a brand and do it in a hurry, and create a personal brand that can supersede the brand of the school that you're potentially representing. I think that's just so valuable. I want to take that and see how you've used that, kind of use the business approach. We've talked about the marketing end of it, the strategic side of it in terms of constructing a roster. how do you, this is kind of an open-ended question, but how do you look at roster construction these days? Obviously, recruiting, but really when you talk about building out your roster, are there lessons that you take, whether it's from your dad or from the NBA? Because I know that while your resume is a long line of coaching positions, you also had a lot of overlap and experience learning from really talented front office guys. So I'm just curious if your philosophy on building a roster now, if it's been impacted by those experiences in any way.
It's been, there's so many people. When I lived in the Bay Area, when I was coaching the Warriors and then got fired and kept a home there because of my sons, one of our neighbors in Danville, California, which is in East Bay, is Billy Bean. I was able to pick Billy Bean's brain. I was also obviously dug deep into Moneyball. So the statistical stuff and building a roster off some of the philosophies that the Oakland A's have used for many years. But I can go all the way back to growing up in San Diego. Ballard Smith who was the president of the San Diego Padres. He was actually the son-in-law of Ray Kroc, who owned the Padres. So I was a part of some draft rooms, and I understood in baseball about the cross-checkers and regional scouts, and that helped formulate a philosophy. And then working in the NBA, being in a draft room with Jerry West, and learning lessons for what Jerry West looked for in a player and how he did not ever want to cave into his beliefs on what was important in a player. Profile became, really important to me as well. So just being around so many great minds and hearing them talk about constructing a roster, spending time in Orlando, Florida with John Gabriel, Chuck Daly, and then Doc Rivers on formulating a free agency plan. The plan at one point was to
was in Atlanta. Is that right?
No, this was before I was in Atlanta.
Okay.
In Orlando, when we were trying to come up with a format for how we could potentially get Tim Duncan and Grant Hill, and it ended up being Grant Hill and T-Mac, Tracy McGrady. So being around people that plan either a draft room, and then also spending time with Michael Lombardi, who's a really good friend and has been a long-time NFL executive. Those guys I'm constantly talking to. And really interesting, while I was playing at the University of San Diego, I had an internship with the San Diego Padres. My direct boss was David Morway. And David left the Padres and then later became an agent, and then went from being an agent to then being assistant general manager with the Indiana Pacers, and is now an assistant GM with the Utah Jazz. And actually right before I joined you, Adam, David Morway and I were going back and forth. And so I have so many friends that are in management. David Mintzberg's currently went from the Milwaukee Bucks to the Detroit Pistons, is a really good friend. And I'm constantly talking to these NBA people about what they're looking for and how they're trying to build a team. And I think all those things, trying to constantly evolve, become really, really important from a roster construction standpoint.
Yeah, and I think that is interesting because a lot of the times, there's so many different things, so many threads I want to pull in what you just said. But when people talk about the NBA to college basketball transition, I think they seem to think about it more from an X and O perspective. They can down pick and roll. Everybody's doing that now. But, 5 years ago, it was like, they can down pick and roll, or they're going to be advanced in what they do with this kind of coverage or whatever. But if, it seems like you're applying what they did from building out their roster to a recruiting standpoint. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think you're right about the X and O's too. Like, there's no doubt, like literally zero doubt, that NBA coaches are better than college coaches, X and O's. And I'm saying that with zero shadow of a doubt, because I've coached against some guys that are the NBA coaches. There's nothing like them. Mm-hmm. But from a roster construction, for sure, Adam, like for us, we always talk as if we're in a draft room. Like, is this player going to be like a lottery pick, meaning a freshman starter, or is this guy a late first round guy who might be a 7th or 8th man, or is this player that you're recruiting as an incoming freshman? Is this guy more like a late second round development type player that maybe can have an impact in year 2 and 3?
Right.
That's kind of how we label players. Instead of saying a guy's a 4-star, a 5-star, or a 3-star,
Right.
we have these different tiers based on what an NBA general manager would say in a scouting meeting.
Yeah, no, it's so, I mean, there's so many different places we could go to off that, but even with what I do, like you see these little boxes that is he a top 100 guy? Is he a top 50 guy? Is he? And so much of it depends on other variables that are going to be different depending on where he ends up, what the situation is. They'll say, well, what's his impact going to be as a freshman? And we'll say, well, where's he going to be? What's the style going to be? What kind of situation is he going to be in? So it's just interesting for me. And I also think it's a more authentic representation to kind of give a glimpse to fans, because not everybody thinks about recruiting and prospects in the same way, shape, or form. All right, I've got to ask, and I don't want you to give away any trade secrets, but is there a big, so if I said to you from an evaluation standpoint, without, I said, what was one thing that I could learn, or that an evaluator could learn, or a takeaway from, whether it's Jerry West or any of those guys, that something tangible that you say, maybe most people don't put enough stock into this, or maybe they overthink that. And again, I don't want don't give me the good stuff, but just the chapter 1 of the Cliff Notes, if you could.
I mean, I think with all the people that I've been around that have been really good evaluators, it's what are they going to be short term, but more importantly, what can they develop into?
Mm-hmm.
And then that comes down to work ethic, makeup of a player. But I think that the ability to see a vision on what a player can be, and then identifying, does the guy have enough skill level that he can continue to grow as a player? And there's certain skills that maybe a guy cannot grow in, because maybe his shooting form is so bad that he's just going to have very, very small steps in his progression. Or it could be a guy that really can stroke, or not. He's not a great shooter now, but he's got an incredibly beautiful stroke that maybe just needs more repetition and more confidence. So I think having to have the ability to see a vision with the player and where he potentially can get to becomes a huge part of the evaluation process.
I've always thought, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, I've always thought that was kind of program specific too. I mean, take player A. He may have a lot of upside. He may have a lot of kind of untapped potential. But he might end up being a very different player 3 years from now in one program than he will in another. And obviously there's no way to really tangibly measure that, because he's going to make whatever choice he makes, and you're not going to be able to measure it against something. But, I say, the guys who, would Donovan Mitchell be Donovan Mitchell if he didn't go to Louisville for 2 years? The growth in his game, and I'm using him because you just mentioned the Utah Jazz, was unprecedented. So I'm curious to get kind of your thoughts on that. Do you think it's program specific, or specific to the fit between the coach and the player, or a certain style?
I think there's just so many, variables in there. I mean, I think that, there are, I was talking to an NBA assistant GM the other day, and he wanted to go through certain players, and we got to a certain program, and he's like, well, we don't draft players from that program. And I said, why? And he said, the guys don't play hard. Yeah. And so it's interesting to me that, like if you come from a disciplined environment or an environment of work ethic, I think it really helps a player. But then on the flip side, I've been in draft rooms where somebody will say, hey, this player has not been very well coached, so he's got a higher ceiling. Right. A player that's been maxed out by a good coach. So I think it really depends on, like the general manager or whoever's running a pro organization when they start evaluating players. But certainly, putting a player into a system where he can flourish at the collegiate level, really, really helps a guy. For instance, Mason Jones fit in really well with my personality and with our system and our style of play. I mean, he really, really fit in because we gave him a lot of freedom. And he was a player that needed freedom offensively to be able to show all parts of his offensive game. And so I do think that, style of play, system, how a guy fits, it does come down to sometimes what program you do choose.
Now, you alluded to this earlier, but I wanted to dig a little deeper because even though you grew up around the game, basketball purist, lifer, got a lot of connections to other sports. You mentioned Billy Bean. I think you mentioned briefly connections to the Raiders. And I may be getting this wrong, but I think this is rooted back in some experiences with your dad as well. Is it true that Tony Dungy and Dave Winfield played for your dad? Is that true?
That's true. Tony Dungy was a quarterback at the University of Minnesota, and he was on my dad's basketball team as well. My dad played 3 sports as a college player, football, basketball, and baseball. And so he was a big believer in guys that could play multiple sports. And then Dave Winfield was a pitcher at the University of Minnesota. And my dad was walking through an intramural game and saw Dave Winfield and pulled him right off the intramural court. And Dave ended up starting in the Big Ten. And my dad would always say Dave Winfield was the best rebounder that he ever coached. So yeah, both those guys were on my dad's University of Minnesota basketball team.
And so and I don't know if that was the root of it, but from there's kind of been this, history of you studying different sports. I know, as I said, you talked about the baseball analogy and diving into Moneyball, but I've heard you say on other podcasts that when you left Golden State, you were going into the office with was it the Oakland Raiders, and that's where you would go to watch film and be able to learn from them. How much from other sports have you been able to bring to basketball that maybe is at the time unique to this particular game?
So much. I mean, I was studying jump balls the other day because we try to, we feel like that's a form of competition, a jump ball.
Yeah.
We all know it's not going to have a huge effect, but I started watching an NHL hockey game and thought about face-offs.
Face-offs, yeah.
So now I'm studying face-offs and jump balls as a project. One of the things that we're going to talk to our team about is cutting. And Chad Ochocinco, when you watch him run a pass pattern, and sometimes in football, you've got to run a pass pattern to get a teammate open, which is no different sometimes in basketball when you've got to make a basket cut to get someone open. And then we've also are going to use some wide receiver clips to talk about, cutting hard to the rim to score, like a defense or a wide receiver's got to cut in front of a defensive back's face across the middle of the field. So I think you continually learn and evolve from other sports, and I think your players love it. It breaks up the monotony of constantly talking about basketball. Our entire shoot around, Adam, is based off football. I went and studied John Gruden when he was in the Tampa Bay Bucks, and I watched how they did their 2-minute format. And so we took their entire red zone defense, we took all that stuff and we implemented into our 45-minute game day shoot around. And anybody, mostly TV people that come, it's a really unique way of doing things. And then the way that we do breakdown drills is stolen from the way football teams do breakdown drills with their linemen, with their linebackers, with running backs, quarterback. So we've taken a lot of those concepts and evolved. And I tell the staff all the time, like, if you can't bring in a new idea today, then we're probably not worth having a meeting and talk about something we talked about a year or two ago.
Right.
Another thing that I've looked at is, think about the tennis players and their lateral quickness, start, stop, and how you can imply that to your defense as well.
I was actually a tennis player growing up, and had the same coach for for basketball and tennis, and he used to tell me all the time. He said, "This is helping your footwork," and that's interesting stuff, even from an injury prevention standpoint. Have there been any other places? Because one of the things that I always find interesting, and every once in a while, I wrap these interviews up with some seemingly random questions, but I'm always interested in trying to connect potentially variables that might not seem to be associated. So is there anywhere else other than other sports that you've gone for innovation, or to be able to kind of lead you to think outside the box, or has it been primarily other sports?
Yeah, I would say other sports. I don't think there's been, I actually, I'll take that back. Like, my daughter's involved in dance. And so, throughout the COVID and I've watched kind of how she's, learns through Zoom and what grabs her attention, and when she gets bored through watching her dance instructor. And then it's interesting because she's so much more into her solo dances than when it's with her dance team. And so I've thought about, like, how can we take the solo thought in a young woman's dance stuff and try to grab our players' attention and call and do something that's solo. Right. Meaning, maybe it's just individual skill solo session. I'm not really sure. That's something that just in the last few weeks, I've tried to sit back and watch my daughter. Cool. And when her antenna gets really raised and the excitement level, it's during her solo dances as opposed to when she's with her whole group.
I always like to ask every coach if they are, I don't know if you're a big reader, if you're not, but if there's a book that has been really impactful on them, or if not a book, sometimes it can be a movie or a podcast. But I just love to pick coaches' brains on that. And I usually end up reading a lot of the books myself, although not as fast as I would like given my young children. But anything along those lines that has really impacted you?
Yeah, Gridiron Genius, because Michael Lombardi is a friend of mine, and basically Gridiron Genius is written by Michael Lombardi, who worked for the Patriots and Bill Belichick, and he was also with Coach Belichick with the Cleveland Browns, and he also worked in Oakland with Al Davis, and then he with the San Francisco 49ers and Bill Walsh. So he's been around some great coaches, and he kind of goes through their philosophy in that book. And then what I do every day is I print somewhere around 50 pages. I'll go to random articles. I'll just Google search leadership or Google search.
I was going to show you mine sitting in the bin next to me, but I'm not going to pull it up right now.
I do it every day. I get on a treadmill or a elliptical machine. I have a highlighter, read the materials, throw down what I don't want, highlight what I want to keep. And then I just try to steal as many ideas as I can to either show our team video clips of what I've read, or maybe it's a leadership thing. And what we've done with our team of late is I bought a social injustice calendar.
You're stealing my next question. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So this calendar, actually, Rick Carlisle, who played for my father in the old CBA with the Albany Patroons, Rick, while they were in the bubble, the Mavericks, would read this social injustice calendar. We went and bought it. It's incredible. It's only a $2 price. We bought a whole bunch for people in our neighborhood. Wow. We have it in our locker room. We also have it underneath our dry erase board on the practice floor. And we read each day a lesson that happened in history. And then our team's able to get up and kind of talk about that particular instance, or what it might mean to them, or any feelings that they might have about it. And we do the same thing with our 10-year-old daughter before she goes to school.
That is exactly where I wanted to end this, because we were able to do a series of podcasts on social justice and a lot of the issues that continue to face our country earlier in the summer. And what we've done is try and make a commitment to continue to keep that dialogue going. And I know that you've lived that with your family. And so that was going to be my final question to you, just to see what you're doing with your family, with your team, if there's other things that we can learn from. So is there anything else you want to add on that front? You kind of went there organically, which is great, but I do always like to include that in all of our podcasts.
No, I was exposed at a really young age. When my dad was coaching at Minnesota, there was a fight in the 1970s between University of Minnesota and Ohio State. And it was race based. That fight was, and so I know the inside story of exactly what happened and some of the words and names that were said that led to that fight. And it happened so long ago, it was never brought out in the media. But I know because I heard the conversations, and so I was exposed to, when you're in 5th or 6th grade and these conversations are happening at the dinner table, pretty powerful. But having a daughter, who's mixed, we have conversations all the time with her. Right. And even my wife, she's opened my eyes every single day to something maybe that I haven't thought about as a white 55-year-old man. So I think for all of us, it's just, we got to listen to each other. We've got to respect each other. We've got to understand there's different viewpoints, but understand that we have to change as a society.
That is, couldn't have said it any better. Coach, thank you so much for making the time to join us today. I know you guys are back on the court and got big plans ahead for the coming season. And season that now looks like it's going to happen. End of November, we're tipping off. So I'm sure everybody is very excited.
No, we are excited. Thanks so much for having me on, Adam. It's been great.
Yeah, all right, everybody. That is Arkansas head coach Eric Musselman. I'm your host, Adam Finkelstein. And thank you, as always, for listening to the Upside Podcast.